Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next session in No Code Weekend 3. In this session, we're going to talk to one of our judges, who's Glenn. Glenn is an incredible member in the No Code community, one of the OG members in the space, who's inspired a ton of members, such as myself, when we were just getting started in the world of No Code. I've known Glenn from On Deck No Code Fellowship #1, which is about a year and a half ago, beginning of 2021. And he actually has been involved with some immensely impactful no code projects, working with clients and teaching students who have gone on to build their own exciting projects. So we're going to talk all about no code, a career in the space, and basically working in the service sector with no-code tools and any other questions that you might have with Glenn. Thank you so much for joining us, Glenn. It's so nice to have you.
Good to be here, Benzie. Thank you for such a lovely introduction.
Amazing. So first of all, how are you doing and what's been up with you the past 1 year?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you. It's been a busy year. I think throwing yourself into the no-code space is like a roller coaster ride, and we're all on that ride together. So just feeling everybody's ups and downs and all of the different things that have happened over the past year, and now we're hitting this recession and wars going on, and there's just so much stuff which is there uh, to involve us. And yeah, it's mostly been a pleasure. I think just seeing everybody embrace this technology and this movement and actually just want to do something with it and positively contribute to society and improve their own lives in the process. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm about is how can we utilize this to our own advantage, not in a selfish way, but how can we make the lives that we really want to make? And then also, how can we pay that forward and pass that on and do it for our uh, colleagues, our peers, our children, all of that. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've been doing for the past year.
Yeah, there's so much to talk to you about with all the projects that you're doing and especially the educational programs that have been so transformative. But before we dive into any of that, please tell us a little bit about your background, about yourself. How did you get into no code?
Mm, Okay, so I started as a web designer, web developer. I used to hang code back in the day when it was really new. So it was exciting at that point because it never existed before. And but I was never a very good coder. I kept trying to get better and get better, but then I would sit with a proper coder and I'd look at what they're doing and just think, I'm never going to be able to do that. There's something about that, you know, mindset that I just don't have. So I kept plodding on with that and plodding on. I thought this isn't really going anywhere, but it gave me really great experience. And then we had children come along. So with our first child, I thought I need something a bit more stable. Went back to employment and became an e-commerce and digital marketing specialist. So it was another interest of mine anyway, and I spent a lot of time learning all of that stuff and applying it within the businesses that I work for. And it was great. Again, all the same kind of technology, but rather than building stuff, I was in a team where they would build the stuff, but I would help direct that. So I saw the other side of it, and then I left employment to start up my own digital marketing and e-commerce agency about 3 years ago. And just at that same time, no code was starting to take off in the public eye, and I'd already been using tools like Zapier and other things at work, but I hadn't really truly appreciated that those tools collectively were going to become a thing. This thing that we call the no code movement. So when no code conf came around 2019, uh, relatively early in the business's stage, couldn't really even afford the plane ticket to go over there, but I'm like, no, the business is paying for it. I'm going, and it was amazing. I think that conference just changed everything for a lot of people, and thanks to Webflow for that. And I was in a room full of people like me, and I'd never really had that before. I just thought, I can't believe this. That I found my tribe, as people say, and there was no turning back from there. I thought this is what I want to do. I want to be part of this. It's what I've always been about, is using technology to change people's lives. And this was the most obvious way to do it. So I just got stuck in and started building and learning and doing as much as I possibly could as quickly as possible.
That is incredible. So No Code Conf in 2019 is where it seems to have started for you, finding your tribe. And I think there's these one-off incidents for all of us who just started, maybe not as early as 2019, but maybe 2020 is when I found my tribe, late 2020 after the pandemic began. And pretty sure that there's these inflection points for everyone in our journeys where it might have been an educational program, it might have been an event, it might be following someone on Twitter. But I think it's how it all came together. But that's it's crazy. 2019 is quite early. I'm pretty sure that no code was not as cool back then. Not many people might have known what no code was.
Yeah, absolutely. It felt like everybody at the conference were walking around wondering why they were there, and everything that we heard, every talk that came along, it just sort of solidified, why we thought we should be there. And then by the end of it, everybody was just hyped, So it was a real kind of leap of faith almost, I think, for the attendees. But it was a smash hit, and then everybody just then spread out, I think, from that point and just went off to the different corners of the world and got on with it. So yeah, it was a magic event.
That's incredible. Big shout out to Webflow for being one of the pioneers in the space as always. So, how did you get started with no code? What was the first project that you used no code on, and how did that go?
Mm. Okay, so we had existing clients, and they were kind of fitting the bill. So like maybe they had a Shopify site, or they were doing other things with data that we needed to manipulate behind the scenes or something like that. And we just thought, okay, let's start using these tools with them. But then we went actively looking for no code projects. So when we talked to, we did a little bit of lead, sort of acquisition work. And when we started talking to them, we would say, look, we're going to tell you how we're going to build this. There's this new thing everybody's talking about. We're not going to have a developer. We're not going to do it. We're going to do it this way. If that's okay with you, we're going to go ahead with it. If you don't want to do it that way, you're going to have to go and work with somebody else. So we were that determined. We didn't just want the work. We wanted to do no-code projects. So it was actually a council, a local council in Devon. We started with a relatively small project, and they needed to build something which is actually fairly complex for one of our first no-code builds, which involved like a Google map and having pins on the map and data flowing into this map from a Google Sheet, or rather via Airtable. So it was quite an ambitious project for us in the early days. But that was our first, I guess, what you'd call proper no-code project, where we had integrations and data moving around the place and publishing issues and all that kind of stuff. So that was our first one. And then from there, it just grew, whether it was word of mouth or more acquisition work, or whatever. But we've done all kinds of things since then, from sort of scraping websites on autopilot, putting a seed keyword in and then just scraping lots of details from websites, through to building like a back-end content management system for Shopify and for Webflow, and just apps. And it's just been so varied. But I think the most important thing that we've found out is that if you've got the principles behind you, you know what a no-code project should have as its what we call core concepts. That as long as you remember those as you're building, it doesn't really matter which tools you build in, because they're all going to be similar. Because of course all these tools are just an abstraction on code, and code works in a very particular way with data and the UI and logic. So those are the things that we always remember as we're either choosing a new tool or working with clients, is how is that going to fit into the way this stuff works. And I think the the people attending No Code Weekend should always remember that. It's like, work with the systems, don't break the systems, don't try and work around them, work with them, because they'll be your best friends if you can actually work together with them and utilize their strengths. So yeah, top tip.
That's really great advice. So let's talk a little more about some of the projects that you mentioned. Can you tell us about your work in the no-code space? what your favorite projects are, what you're working on currently. Take your time.
Okay, of course, yeah. So we do a mixture, or I do a mixture. I'll talk about me here with client work and my own personal projects. So I'll demonstrate one of my favorite client project in a second, and also one of my favorite sort of personal projects. And there's not really that much difference between the two, apart from the fact that obviously with the client, there's somebody involved, they have very specific needs, and you need to be able to deliver those. With your own projects, it's almost the opposite. You have such a wide open field that you could do anything, and it can be a little bit paralyzing because you think, well, if I could do anything, where do I start? So what I like to do is almost treat a personal project like a client project. It's like, let's define this. What's the MVP? Why am I building this? Who's my audience? Just try not to think of it as just a side project, a side hustle, something that's just insignificant. Because why think of it like that? If you're spending your time on it, it's important. It's important to you. You're giving that time up, doing something else to actually work on that. So, I always say make sure it's meaningful. Have some meaning to you as to why you're doing it. That meaning could be as simple as I just want to learn tool X. It doesn't have to be like some global changing phenomenon, but as long as there is a reason. So that's where I carry across the same sentiment across the different kinds of projects. Client projects tend to focus around my core stack, which has settled down over the past 3 years because I've looked at lots and lots of different platforms, and what I have found is I've gravitated towards tools that clients are comfortable with, that are also very popular in the no-code space, so that there's lots of support from communities, and you kind of know that those tools are going to be around. They're not going to disappear overnight. So I think that's the other important thing for me. I can't really put something in for a client where that tool's just going to suddenly vanish. So yeah, so my core stack tends to be around Airtable or Xano as the two data stores. I'll use Integromat slash Make, as it now is, over Zapier for various reasons. And I'll use Webflow mainly for the front end build. But actually, the front end bit is almost the most agnostic in my stack because it really does depend on what you want in terms of functionality or whether it's mobile or desktop, etc. So that's the one that's most fluid for me. But I think having a solid back-end data store, database, whatever people want to call it, and having a good grasp of how to manipulate data in the middle, the logic bit. I think those two you tend to want to learn quite heavily and stick with them. And the front ends are, as I say, a bit more fluid. So yeah, I'm happy to show those. If I can share my screen.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so this one is this is my favorite project I've been working on this past while, which is called alwaysinvert.com. And my client here is a writer, so he wants to be able to get his writing out there, both in terms of newsletters on his website, and he also has a community as well as obviously social media. So this site, the purpose of this is to pull all of that together. Now, the site itself looks relatively simplistic on purpose because we want to focus on the content, which mostly is text. But we wanted to be able to present that in different ways, like that carousel you see there. It's a bit of an introduction as to what the site is about. Um, and things like, this, where you have these highlights of the different articles and quotes and things from around his website, and just having a little bit of movement, but nothing too fancy. And all of this needs to be content managed. So being a Webflow website, you could just manage all of this in the CMS and just work with the collections. But actually, what we really wanted to do is tackle seeing bugs as I'm looking at the site. Work with a content management system which would be more of a single source of truth away from Webflow, so that that same content could be shared easily to the newsletter, to the community, wherever else that it needs to go. So this is really just the main front end to the content, but an important one, but it is still just one front end. So you can go into articles. We can have a look at what we've got here. We've got categories where we can, narrow down what we want to have a look at. You can look into a particular article, usual kind of stuff. Nothing dramatic here, but we have rich text content like this that we need to be able to manipulate and get that into Webflow CMS. And if we're handling that outside Webflow, then we need to be able to get that data in without error. And even that's a little bit of a challenge. So I don't know whether anybody's worked with Airtable and tried to get content from Airtable into Webflow, but that requires manipulation. It's not as easy as just copying that data across. So what you'll see here is the database itself, and you'll have just your typical kind of grid view, which isn't the easiest to work in. So we now have interfaces at our disposal in Airtable, which actually make this a little bit easier. But still, it's it's not the easiest place to work. So that's the back end, and then you can actually use this as your engine room. So anything that you need to do here to actually get that content where it needs to be, we can do things like have a tick box to say update Webflow, highlight on home, remove highlight on home, publish on a particular day, all of this kind of stuff. And this is where Airtable isn't just your average database or data store. You could do more with it. You can use it to actually drive actions, to trigger actions and drive those actions. Um, so when we do that kind of thing, we would then typically have something like this where you have a Integromat scenario or flow where you're watching for changes effectively over in a particular table, in Airtable or a view, and then we need to manipulate that. So as I say, if you've got rich text coming across, that doesn't come across easily. You have to actually do some work here to convert it, remove particular character strings, replace replace other strings, etc., etc., etc. And this is just all cleansing and sanitizing content to get it ultimately over into the Webflow CMS. And the nice thing about that is having a scenario like this is that you can then record back data that Webflow has now created, and you can on the fly record that information back into your records in Airtable. So in this case, we want to know what the new URL is that's just been created here, and also the Webflow item ID. And the reason we want that is because it makes it a lot easier to then manipulate those records when you're trying to tie them up with Webflow in the future. So you're always trying to connect these two up. So that's you'll see all kinds of scenarios like this. I tend to work with automation in a almost like in a programming sense, in that if you're doing a function, you're trying to do a flow of information, try and keep it as simple as possible. So this one is updating quotes of the day they're called, and you're either creating a new one or you're updating an existing one. And this type of logic is very common in the work that I do. Is this either new or existing? And you know it's new or existing based on some kind of bit of data, like the Webflow item ID. And then you just concentrate on that one thing. If you try and do too much, like I'm going to update all the content all in one go, all in one very big automation flow, you get into a real mess. Whereas this is a lot easier to work with. So you'll end up with a whole series of these automations, which are all doing slightly different things, or they're copies that are effectively doing the same thing but for a different table. But that's okay. That's totally fine. That's doable and acceptable in automation terms. So that's just one thing I wanted to show. I don't want to go into any more depth than that, but just to get this sense across that you're working with three different systems here, but they're all working in harmony together, or in as much harmony as possible when you're talking about technology. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was incredible. I think that is a really good illustration of what you were talking about with respect to systems, but also trying to understand what automations look like and just how complicated you can get into depending on what you're doing, even if it is something as simple as a website, but just how much is possible on a website. I think it's really valuable for beginners to understand what is possible when they start. And while it's easy to quickly build a static website, there's so much layer that you can add to it, and there's so much that you can learn to build something like this. So thank you so much for that demonstration. Are there any other projects you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, if we've got time, excuse me, I've got a bit of a cough at the moment. If we've got time, this one is one of my personal projects, which we launched. I did this with a a business partner. We did this a few months ago when the Ukraine-Russia war was at its height, and we were getting a lot of Ukrainian refugees in Europe fleeing, obviously, and trying to find homes somewhere else in another country. So the UK put this scheme in place, uh, the government did, which we wanted to support because they didn't move particularly fast. So even though the government were recognizing a certain number of Ukrainian refugees wanting to come to the UK, they were gathering that kind of information, and there were UK homes and homeowners wanting to actually help. There was no way to really connect those two sets of people together, and this is where the government there was a hole in their plan. So what was happening was people were trying to find each other on Facebook or other social media platforms, and it was a real mess. You know, people were struggling to connect, and it didn't feel particularly safe to people. So we thought there's a need here to actually connect these two sets of people together in a safe manner, protecting people's information, not exposing your social media accounts and all of that, and actually just do this in a relatively simple way. Now, obviously, with the refugees on the move, we immediately knew that it needed to be a mobile app. We needed it to be user account based so that you as an individual could log in to actually try and find somebody to connect with, and then log out again, because you might be even sharing a phone. Not everybody will have their own phone necessarily. So we tried to think of all the different things that would be the case here. But you'll see here's the screenshot of the app that we built. Um, so in this one, it was built in DraftBit and Xano as the back end, because we really wanted to make sure that we didn't have any limitations at all. Whether those limitations were number of records, say, in an Airtable base, or uh, something called sort of API rate limit is another one. You know, if this was going to be very busy, we didn't want to hit things like that and cause issues, because, not to be dramatic, but there's a part of this which is sort of life or death. And I know you know all about that with some of the work you've done in India, Venzi, and you've got to have a system that is reliable so that it doesn't fall over on you. You know, this needs to be solid. So we chose technologies that we knew would be extremely solid, and they kindly sponsored this enterprise by giving their tools for free. We weren't looking to raise any money or anything like that. It was purely just support from a kind of a platform provision point of view. So Xanodraft Bit Mailgun then actually handled all the emails. So the way this would work is the UK homeowner would list themselves with a profile on the app. They would actually say what they have available, whether it's in terms of the rooms in their homes that they have available, what they can help with, um, all that kind of stuff. And then when it's available, from all the information that you would need to know. And then the Ukrainian refugees could then browse those listings and actually choose to register their interest with that homeowner. So they're the ones actually making the the effort to connect. So to help them with that, what we did was the refugees have a profile as well, and then we did an implicit match in the system between what their needs were and what was available from the UK homeowners. So they were presented with a sub list, a filtered list of homeowners that they could contact that would fit the bill. So that was something that we did all inside DraftBit. And again, we're just making it really clear that it was free to use for everybody. There was never going to be any cost to any of this. Everything's hidden until you decide to actually make that contact. And then we got some great coverage in the British press as just somebody just trying to help with this kind of thing. Um, and yeah, and that was basically the project. So we had, this is the Xano database. I can't go into it because obviously there's people's personal details in here, but you can see we had sort of 2,000 users registered in there, 9,000 user connections made between those people, so there's two sets of people. And if you wanted to have a quick look at sort of the draft bit interface, if people haven't had a go with this, it's become more of an enterprise level platform, this one, but we used it here for a different purpose. But you know, it's not a hugely affordable platform compared to something like Glide, which I would totally recommend. Um, but as a very solid app building tool, it's fantastic. So you can see here that we can connect to our Xano services behind the scenes. We can pull through everything that we need. We can manipulate that data. It can update in real time on the screens, so it doesn't matter where you are in the app. It will just automatically update. So we don't have issues around trying to bridge the data between the front end and the back end. There kind of is no bridge. It's a direct link between those two platforms. So I think, Venzi, you were talking about software and Airtable, for example, and that's the same. It's got this sort of direct uh, native integration between those two, and it misses out that automation layer in the middle, which can quite often make a lot of sense to do that. Is actually just connect the two up. So yeah, so that's I think all that I need to say about that. But I could recommend all of those platforms. Absolutely fantastic. Mailgun, by the way, is just an equivalent of SendGrid or those kinds of mailing services that you can make use of literally just to handle the mailing out. But Xano and Mailgun work really, really well together. And yeah, DraftBit just hooks into the Xano backend to handle everything from authentication to recording data. Yeah,
That is simply wonderful just to have a sense of how it all works together. Thank you so much for that deep dive. I very much appreciate that. Some of that must have been private, but thank you so much for showing us whatever you could. Give me 1 second. So one of the projects that we still haven't talked about is No Code Kids. I know that's
mm,
something that you're really passionate about, and I see updates about it on Twitter all the time. So would you like to share a little bit about the project with us?
yes. Let me go back to screen share. Hang on a second. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, thank you for bringing up NoCo Kids. This again is one of those personal projects which Max Haining and I are passionate about. We really feel like learning no code once you're in the workplace is too late. It's a bit like learning how to code when you've been hired as a developer. Um, it's just you need to know about this stuff sooner in life. So we set out at the beginning of the year to do a trial on whether or not we could actually teach no code to kids in schools. Would they be receptive to it? Did they want to learn about it? Do they enjoy it? And we were lucky enough to be able to work with two schools and 30 kids to actually run our trial. We put this, as you can see here, this system together using Webflow and its new memberships features. I'm actually on a live stream with Webflow on the 30th, going through all of this in more depth. So if anybody's interested, they can join us there. But the long and the short of it is, this is the dashboard for the content, and we've built this learning management system, this LMS, to actually deliver this content to the kids. So it's a self-paced program. Um, all of the content is wrapped up inside here, so there are videos and obviously modules and topics. So you kind of go through this process one by one, just like you would in any other kind of LMS. But what we found was, by looking at other tools, platforms like Podia, Teachable, things out there, they're amazing platforms, but they just didn't do exactly what we wanted them to do. So we just thought, we're no coders, we need to build our own LMS and walk the walk, right? So what we tell the kids is that this platform is built with no code tools. We're talking about no code sort of flexibility, and you could build pretty much anything with it. So why would we use a platform that existed to actually do that? So that was our point of view. Um, we lean fairly heavily on Webflow's take on the no code movement, because out of everybody out there, we really believe that Webflow's leading the way. So the NoCode Conf 2021 keynote, I don't know whether people saw that, anybody's into Webflow, but it was incredible. We think it completely nailed it. The whole team nailed it, and we keep drawing on information that Webflow has to say about it. And we just do things like brief history of of it all, how we traditionally built software, just to sort of add some context to this. And then you just work through it. So you work through all of these modules and these topics, how we can now build software, etc., etc., etc. More on the from that video there. And we just talk about all the different tools along the way. So we try to make it as accessible as possible whilst also making it fun. So by the time they get to, let's have a look, by the time they get to module 4, they're now starting to build. So it sounds like they've had to do a lot before they get to build, and that is actually some feedback we've taken on board. We want to introduce building much sooner in the program, but this is where they would actually start to actually build things, and we give them all kinds of things. So creating an automation using Zapier, and then all of the resources that they can link to there. Um, we then have building a little site using which is just a fun little tool to build web pages, creating a form using Tally and Airtable. So we really want to show them all the different concepts around no code, not just learn this tool, learn this tool, learn this tool. We really want to get across this idea that this is a way of thinking, not you need to go and learn X number of tools and do these things. And of course, kids are far more open-minded than adults are about this kind of stuff. They've taken to this idea of jumping around between different tools as easy as if they're jumping around between different apps on their phone. It's second nature to them to do this. So that's been a great insight, is that none of this has been daunting. If anything, we feel like we could probably challenge them even more. So that's something that has come out of this, and we're now restructuring this program, redoing the content over the summer, ready for the September cohorts, and just moving forwards with actually making this as challenging and as fun, as interesting as possible. So that's where we've got to so far. And then ultimately, just so that you know, we're heading towards opening up this content to um, parents who are maybe homeschooling, or small schools, alternative schools, any learning environment really where they're keen for their kids to learn. We've got a great opportunity to work with a group of girls who are doing they do a girls code club, but actually no code should be introduced to them as well, not just coding, but no coding as well. So we'll be working with them as well soon. So the opportunities are huge, and of course this is worldwide. We focused on the UK for now because that's where we live, so it's easy from a time zone point of view. But we want this to be international and make sure everybody benefits from what we're trying to do here.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So incredibly comprehensive. I'm so glad that all of this content is already out there. Definitely going to recommend it to those of um, those of them who ask me about introducing no code to students, to school students, and of course any schools that might be interested in leading a curriculum focused on no code. Thank you so much for all of your insights, Glenn. Before
You're
you
welcome.
go, could you tell us about your favorite tool or website that has helped you immensely in your journey?
Oh, that's a good one. Um, I think it has to be Airtable. It just has to be Airtable. I mean, I'm in it every day. I'm constantly pushing it to do more. So, and every time I do that, it's ready. It's ready to actually deliver on that. So I don't, for a larger project, or something that needs to scale, I go to Xano because it's just fully scalable. Whereas Airtable, it's designed really for that smaller project or smaller enterprise. So any kind of MVP or anything where you're trying to actually bring a fairly non-technical person or team into the build or into the use of that app, that solution after you've built it, they all get on with Airtable as well. So it's not just something that you can use easily as a no-coder. If you're handing this to somebody, that's the other bit of this that we don't talk about enough, is who's actually going to be using this after you're done with it. And I found that again, Airtable people are really comfortable with. They get it. Whereas if you were to hand them over to something which was a bit more traditional looking database and just a table, grid, they're going to struggle a bit with that. But there's something about the UI around Airtable that people really get. And I'm really excited, just the last thing on that, to see that Glide now has their Airtable integration. So I'm going to be doing a lot more work. In fact, I'm doing a build this weekend as well, just to again walk the walk. Everybody's building something, so I'm going to build something. I'm going to be using that Airtable and Glide integration to actually build something. I'm going to challenge myself to do it in an hour. I'm going to dip in and out of it over the course of today, but I'm still going to just take it out, and I'll be posting about that on Twitter. But yeah, so.
I'm really excited to see that. But lastly, could you take a moment to talk to us about what excites you about No Code Weekend and why you think it might be important to have events such as this in the space?
Oh, for sure. I think these are really important. As soon as you asked me whether I'd be involved, I said yes instantly, because I think that for those of us that have been around longer, doing it a bit longer, we need to encourage everybody else to get stuck in and just try things, experiment, learn. No, nothing is wasted really if you've got that mindset. So as long as you set out to say, I'm just going to learn something, it doesn't matter if it doesn't produce anything that's going to, I don't know, make me money or advance my career. You There are things that I think you learn on weekends like this that you don't learn in other situations. Let's just say maybe you're learning no code, sorry, you're using no code at work, or you're only touching on a certain tool like Zapier, say, and you're using that in your day-to-day tasks. You don't get to actually push that and actually see what it can really do, because you're trying to get a task done, right? It's you're being paid to do a task. Whereas if you do a weekend like this, you say, right, I'm comfortable with Zapier. Now what can I do with my initial knowledge to actually do something else with it? So a little bit like the Ukrainian project, that I hadn't learnt draft bit particularly well before that build, and I had a purpose. I had something really important I needed to do. I knew DraftBit could do it, but actually, until I got stuck in, I had to have a sort of a blind faith that I could get there. And 2 days later, we pretty much built the app. So it's that fast. So if we could do that in 2 days, then a weekend is long enough to build something of value that can actually really have an impact on somebody's life or many people's lives. So, and I know you know that because of the work you've done too. So I think that's what these weekends can be about: is push yourself, try things, experiment, and collaborate. Work together if you can. If there's an ability to do that, talk to each other on Twitter with the hashtag or whatever it is that actually binds you together, because you're all in it together, and you're all having fun and learning, and that's another important part of this. Is we may sit on our own quite a lot of the time in our rooms, but there are hundreds, thousands, however many people out there all doing that at the same time. So don't forget that we are all connected. It's just sometimes we feel that we're not.
That's a brilliant insight. Have fun, collaborate, experiment. Most importantly, love what you're doing so as to accelerate your learning in a short period of time. That's really why we founded No Code Weekend, and that's really the hope. I hope that all the builders get to take that away from this weekend. Thank you so much, Glenn, for your time, and of course, also agreeing to be a judge at this event. So happy to have you, and really excited to see all the builds come out tomorrow.
Yes, me too. No, I'm really looking forward to this. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the judging and just seeing what everybody comes up with, because everybody surprises you, don't they? You never know what to expect, and there's always big surprises. So I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, yes. If the previous editions are anything to go by, we're in for a wild ride tomorrow. Amazing. So we will see you at the No Code Weekend demo day tomorrow with the finalists. Until then, we will be in touch with you on Twitter and share your content. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, Venzi.